And now for more on this breaking news development, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio international affairs analyst Dan Perry, the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press and author of the newsletter Ask Questions Later. Donald Trump is inviting both Joseph Aoun and Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House. Your insights right now.
The magnitude of the moment is huge, basically. We have here an almost unprecedented situation where the position of the government of Israel and the government of Lebanon are not that far apart. And there's the government in Lebanon that claims it wishes to ban Hezbollah and disarm them completely, and more than hints that they're prepared for diplomatic accommodation and even the P word, even peace with Israel under certain circumstances. That's remarkable and hasn't happened with Lebanon for, I guess, 45 years since the Jamal regime. And that effort, of course, failed apart. It would be foolish to dismiss this simply because we know that even though they say they want to disarm Hezbollah, they're too weak to do it. I get that. There's a certain school of thought in Israel that's indifferent to diplomacy and wants to just use force. If we look at what force might mean, it would be holding a buffer zone in southern Lebanon, but Israel's experience with that is miserable because soldiers became sitting ducks. In the end, Israel pulled out in 2000, tail between legs, roughly. Or just degrading Hezbollah, bombing them, occasional raids. Hezbollah runs to the north in the Bekaa Valley. Israel's been doing that in one form or another for 40 years. So maybe it's time to try something else. Now, what that something else might be is obviously complex because it wouldn't have taken a half century to fix if it had been easily fixable. I have always favored reaching out to any hand that is outstretched to you in the Middle East, working with the government of Lebanon, making it everyone's problem, being very public about it, explaining that we will help them however much they want. But Israel's presence in Lebanon is somewhat toxic. Arab countries might be able to help. Maybe Western countries can help. All this is complex. Lebanon is tormented by memories of civil war, which arise again if they contemplate the military taking on Hezbollah. They're traumatized still by the Syrian occupation, more or less, that ended 20 years ago. They're certainly traumatized by Israel. And as for Western powers coming in, well, colonization. So there's no easy answer here. But it's about time that Lebanon came clean and asked for help. And I think we're seeing a version of that. And Israelis and Lebanese should rejoice that there appears to be a window of opportunity here. If it's handled correctly, it may be the Saudi and Gulf money to aid Lebanon, which Lebanon desperately needs, can be part of the equation to create public support for this. And also, if about 3/4 of Lebanese parliament wants to be rid of Hezbollah, there are things they can do short of sending in men with guns to disarm them. They can ban the economic activity of the group, for one thing. They can dry them out. And if Iran is not only weakened, but Syria no longer constitutes a weapons superhighway from Iran into Lebanon for Hezbollah, this is a landscape that is somewhat promising. And last thing I'll say, amazingly, there's no internal Israeli political dispute. Everyone I know of is behind the government in hopes that something good can come of this.
We were talking earlier on in the broadcast about the reaction from the Prime Minister of Lebanon, talking about the various countries he wanted to thank, including the US, France, the European Union, and then Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and Jordan, and your sense of the impact that these countries realistically could be playing in this very tenuous part of the world.
Significant, for sure. We have a real conundrum in that for 40-some years, we've been unable to get rid of Hezbollah. And it's not Israel's problem. It's the region's problem. It's very definitely Lebanon's problem. And I think Israel would be wiser if it didn't seek to have a monopoly over fixing the problem, especially as it has failed in multiple. You could enumerate about a half dozen little wars and mini wars that have failed to achieve a resolution. So, of course, if the entire Arab League, if all the countries you mentioned, stood up as one and took every conceivable step, which would include impeding the financial activities of Hezbollah and absolutely depriving Hezbollah of any legitimacy whatsoever, that would be incredibly helpful. And I repeat, maybe even boots on the ground in Lebanon to change the equation where the Lebanese military is weaker than Hezbollah. It will take a big amount of public diplomacy and cleverness here. And I have to say, the Israeli government, sad to say, seems incapable of it. I constantly hear in various appearances on international TV and in talks I give to various forums, a narrative has set in where Israel's trying to expand its borders. That's the reason why Israel speaks of a buffer zone in South Lebanon. Now, I know this to be nonsense. I understand the cynicism about the current government, but they're not guilty of this. The buffer zone idea in South Lebanon is to prevent Hezbollah from arraying itself 100 meters away from Israel's communities, as any country would like to do. But why on earth is it that Israel's very articulate and eloquent prime minister doesn't summon up the will to hold a news conference and invite the entire world's press and declare that Israel has no territorial ambition on Lebanon that is in any way permanent? We would be gone in 2 seconds if Hezbollah were gone. And I'm glad to see that we are aligned with the government of Lebanon. Let's all of us together figure out a way to help Lebanon disarm Hezbollah, because who could possibly defend the idea of a jihadist militia operating as a state within a state in Lebanon, in Egypt, in France? Would France want such a thing? It's ludicrous. And it's great to see some international consensus on getting rid of it. Perhaps we can come up with a common plan.
Eitan Dangot, your thoughts?
Very clear and very shortly. The area that we are keeping is necessary for the security of the people who are living in the north parts of Israel, especially, and also for the, let's say, for the security of the country. It's something that is necessary, geographical, and we need to keep it till two conditions: peace or agreement with Lebanon, and to be more clear, disarm Hezbollah.
Dan.
Israel has a tremendous problem with public opinion around the world, and you're not going to resolve it just by waving your gun and being a tough guy. You and I, Eitan, said the same thing, but you led with, we must have this territory. And I would lead with, we have no permanent desire for this territory.
Not all the time. I said two conditions
but your conditions came well after people would have remembered that you said the territory. This is incredibly important. Israel needs to emphasize that whatever designs it has on southern Lebanon are purely because of the threat from Hezbollah, which we believe can be dismantled.
I think that two sides understand from both sides, as together we explain. I choose the way, I choose the important to put the end game, the end point for this area that will be clear. South Lebanon has to stop to be the area that from there people, civilians of Israel are murdering.
There's no dispute.
People are, and to do it now is only to hold it, because if not, in 48 hours, you will have in front of the window of Israeli mother of the kibbutzim, Hezbollah people. As my own responsibilities towards my civilians, not to fulfill the wishes or the statement of the president of France. I'm not have any duty towards Macron, who make boycott and disturb Israel all over this war.
So that's the idea of diplomacy. We're saying the same thing, and the question is what you emphasize. You don't care about the president of France? I do, because the European Union is Israel's #1 trading partner. And when you look at the degree of Israel's support in Europe, it is a full-blown national emergency. And so I think Israel needs to be diplomatic and clever in how it presents its case. For sure, Hezbollah cannot be allowed to array itself on a border with Israel. And if Hezbollah continues to exist, Israel's justified in seizing the border.
Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, after this historic meeting earlier on in the week at the U.S. State Department, when asked a question by our colleague, Mike Wagenheim, after the meeting, he said France needs to have nothing to do with this negotiation process. So it begs the question whether the message is getting out exactly as you are describing right now, Dan.
Getting France to be actively involved in encouraging Lebanon to take the necessary steps, to have the necessary courage, I don't think will be achieved through the bellicosity of undiplomatic diplomats. They should be engaged, basically.
In Pakistan, talks are supposed to be resuming between American and Iranian teams. And this has kind of become second tier right now, given what has unfolded in recent hours across the northern front. But Reuters has been reporting that the sides are scaling back their ambitions. And Dan Perry, I'm wondering what you feel about the fact that these talks are likely to resume and what the end game is right now. What would be different for round two that they couldn't resolve after 21 hours in Islamabad a week ago?
The difference between the two rounds is that round two is not round one. And no negotiation with Iranians is ever going to be resolved in round one. In round one, the Americans presented what are terms that Israel would love and that, well, any reasonable person who's not a fan of the regime would love, but is surrender terms for the regime. And it included not only the nuclear file, but also an end to support for militias like Hezbollah. Scaling that back will increase the chances that what's left of the regime can tolerate this. And it isn't clear what is a better idea, because assuming that pretty much all of us want the regime to collapse, including most Iranians, for sure, the better path to that is the more degradation of their abilities on the ground for another couple of weeks while Israelis live in shelters and the world economy suffers, or not so clear. But I suspect that if Iran climbs down from its nonsense about turning the Strait of Hormuz into an Ayatollah booth, and if Iran agrees to say the words, we're not going to enrich above 3.5%, maybe they'll be allowed to enrich at a civilian level. Most NPT signatories are allowed. You can sort of see, and then the issue becomes, will the U.S. agree to unblock assets and unfreeze assets and end sanctions, which would give the regime more life? That would be terrible. So there are no great options here. I had hoped that, given the spectacular decapitation of the first week or so, that the Artesh, the army and the RGC, there would have been divisions and you'd start to see an attempted coup in Iran. What actually happened, I fear, is that the Revolutionary Guard staged a coup. And right now, it no longer really is a theocracy that it was, which may be good, because perhaps they're no longer care so much about exporting jihad. It has become purely a criminal mafia state. But the mafia is very powerful. It controls about a third of that economy, what's left of it. And it may in the end be a problem for the Iranian people. I could see in the end a very bloody civil war in that country. Is it the Americans' business at this point? Remember that a year ago, all Israelis were very happy to have mowed the lawn, to have degraded Iran as badly as it had been degraded in all different ways for 12 days. Right now, the degradation has been much greater, but Israelis aren't happy anymore at all, because they were given to believe that the regime might fall, or that these maniacs might be persuadable to be less maniacal. And those two things are very, very difficult.
Benjamin Netanyahu has issued a statement. Let's take a listen.
We have an opportunity to make a historic peace agreement with Lebanon. President Trump plans to invite me and the president of Lebanon in order to bring forward this agreement. This opportunity exists because since the War of Recovery, we have changed to the core the balance of power in Lebanon. We activated the pagers. We destroyed the massive weapons arsenal of 150,000 rockets and missiles that Nasrallah planned to destroy Israel with. We eliminated Nasrallah, and this new balance of power has changed in a way that we have begun receiving calls from Lebanon over the past month to engage in direct peace talks, something that hasn't happened in over 40 years.
Dan Perry, take it away.
I'm happy to give Netanyahu credit for once holding out an olive branch and being positive. He began his statement by saying that there is a historic opportunity for peace with Lebanon, which is what I said an hour ago. This is an amazing thing that may be in the offing here, and Israel should do everything possible to make it reality, basically. And when he speaks of his hopes that the nuclear issue can be resolved with Iran, and when he speaks of his hopes that he's taking credit for political reasons, but that the Hezbollah problem can be eliminated in Lebanon, and that peace can be established between Israel and Lebanon, and this is perhaps days ahead of a historic meeting with Joseph Aoun, that's actually a cause for celebration.
Dan Perry, Ariel Oseran, and Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangat, so appreciate you being here for this magnificent moment for the region.